Alright, welcome to part 8. Now, if you're coming back straight from part 7, I just want to give you a little bit of a heads up. We left off with a rough fitting of the hood. Now, there were a lot of things that I wasn't completely happy with on the way that the hood was setting. And, you know, even with the hinges, the way I wanted them to mount, there was just a lot of different details that I hadn't worked out in my head yet. And I needed to let that sit for a while. Sometimes when it comes to building something like this, you don't have all the answers right away. So we're going to go through some other things and you're going to see quite a bit of progress on other parts of the car. And then we're going to revisit the hood mounting and the latch later on in this video. So just wanted to let you know that in case you were expecting it to pick right up. We're going to get into some other things, but thank you guys for coming back. Now I feel like this could be the video where we really wrap up the build of this car, at least the main body part. I'd like to pretty much get to a point where we can kind of say we're done building the Vaydor onto the G35 chassis. And you know, the interior, I'm thinking, I don't know for sure how I'm gonna do it, but I'm thinking I might start kind of like a new series, like start at part 1 when I do the interior, maybe do a separate one for the air ride, something like that. I'm not sure yet, but nonetheless, what we're going to try to do is get some of the trim pieces that I've put in primer, get those painted. I'd like to see all the trim black, or at least most of it, you know, get it mounted so I know exactly how it's all going to go. Maybe get the grills put in. We still got to do headlights, so we might be able to cover that in this video. And I want to get the wheels put back on and just get some more motivational photos, you know, something to really show the progress. So, as always, I'm going to have quite a bit to cover in this, so let's get it going, and hope you guys learn a lot. Okay, so one thing I had to do here was I filled in some resin flocks. You can kind of see it back there. And I just wanted to close this gap a bit. And then I had some leftover Bondo, so I had prepped it and threw a nice swipe over that. Usually I don't do it all at once. But you can see the gap is a little tight, which is what you wanted. Now, one of the best ways I found to make consistent gaps, and of course the whole car has to be done. I haven't done any of this yet on any of the car. Everything I've done is pretty much just to get things rough fitted. So that gap needs to be done every that one for the roof wing I've pretty much kind of done, but I think I'm gonna open it up a little bit to allow more for the paint as it builds up. But and that's very consistent. If you guys remember from the video that I did where I mounted that roof wing, every point where there's a bolt, it has a little mound so that that thing is always going to stop in the same place. You know, there's some bit of a spacer built onto the body so that every time I tighten those bolts, that wing is going to only go to that certain place and it's going to stop, and that's what you want. Same over here on top. We're just kind of revisiting this and talking about gapping. I'm actually going to probably add a little bit to the mounds that I have underneath there just to get it to where it raises maybe 1/8 extra here. Maybe an extra 1/8 of an inch I think will take care of what I want to do up here. But you totally build that into the car. Make it to where when you put that roof wing on and certain other parts that it's gonna stop at the same place every time instead of just constantly, you know, squeezing down if you like tighten the bolt more. So anyway, the car needs to be done, but one of the best methods I found for doing this is take something like a Bondo spreader, and since this is super thin, you can really control how thin this gap would be. Literally the stainless steel plus this little bit of 80 grit sandpaper, I mean, I could make a super tight gap with that. I mean, it could be a little tighter than this, and so there's room to play. But at some cases, what you might have to do is add some tape here, and that's what I'll end up having to do when I really start to fine tune the gaps. Is I'll have to set my tool to where the tape is going to consistently, you know, keep it all the same, and you'll feel when it gets to a certain point of being loose that you're done there. But I like this because you need one side to be kind of like your control side, and then you're going to be most likely trying to sand one side at a time. So just like with this, I'll take it and put it in there and just kind of work it, you know, up and down a bit until I feel like it's where I need it. And that's how I like to get my gaps just right. And I mean, it's already doing, you know, better, but my flux was a little bit inconsistent there. It's okay. So I just wanted to outline that a little bit. This is a pretty cool technique, you know, get some adhesive sandpaper and stick a little piece on one side so that you're not cutting both sides at the same time. So at this point, most or all of my trim pieces have at least been rough cut, you know, or kind of fitted on. And what you want to do is, you know, clean up the things that didn't have to be cleaned up when you were fitting. If you haven't done it yet, you know, anything that requires the die grinder, you know, go around and hit all that stuff, make your fine adjustments, or maybe you made some, you know, last marks that you knew it fits, but maybe you're going to do that, you know, right before you do all your sanding. So, you know, take care of all that stuff, and then basically you're going to scuff these parts just like all the rest of the fiberglass, you know, the gel coat. You're going to sand it pretty good with some 80 grit and just prep these things out. Put a good heavy coat of the slick sand primer, see how they turn out. Now, you're either going to find it by sanding, or if you want to go and tap a lot of the parts, you know, find where all the little bubble voids are. We've talked about this in previous videos, but all these trim pieces, you're definitely going to find some stuff that you need to fill as well. So you can kind of decide if you want to grind that out and fill it with just some Bondo or some resin flocks. I like using the resin mixture because I feel like at least the part is solid with that. And if I got a Bondo on top of the primer for waviness, you know, minute stuff, then I can do that. But I like filling in those bubble voids with, you know, at least some good resin putty mixture. So that's pretty much what this takes. It's a lot of work. Allow at least a few days for all the trim pieces. I tackled like 7 of them. You know, I think the 2 running boards, the 2 front splitter pieces, the quarter panel trim, and then I grabbed one of the pieces that goes on the roof wing, but, you know, just to kind of give me a head start into that side of things. Alright, we're making some progress. We got 6 parts ready to spray with some primer, the first round of poly primer. And so it's running boards for the bottom, little whatever people would sometimes call them side skirts, but it's more of a running board. Then we've got the front splitter pieces for the lower bumper, and then here's some trim pieces that I figured I'd go ahead and do those too. You know, anything that's ready, I'll just spray it and roll with it. Fun. I decided to work on 7 parts all at the same time. I've got the other angled trim piece that's outside where I sand everything. But we've got the 2 running boards, the 2 front splitter pieces, which this is the upgraded kit. So if you ordered the upgraded stuff, you're going to have these little fins, and on the running boards you're going to have them too. If you have the regular one, you're going to have that one long piece that goes across the front instead of those 2. Well, you might get both. I got both of them. But your running boards aren't going to have the fins on the regular one. So what I had to do is, this is the first coat of the poly primer. So there's a good 2 to 3 heavy coats on there. And remember, all you're doing is covering up the gel coat with that. So what you want to do is rip this stuff down with maybe some 100 to 120 grit. I was actually using 80 by hand, 180, sorry, in a lot of places, because when you're hand sanding, the scratches are actually deeper. I was using 120 on the DA sander. So 120, 180 is pretty good for sanding this stuff pretty quick. Now, you want to work on top of it since you're covering up the gel coat. You know, it's okay, you're going to cut through in some places. But I really hammered that poly primer on there. So remember, when you sand the gel coat, try to work some of the imperfections out as much as you can with the 80 grit before you even prime. But once you get this first coat of the poly primer on, I really hammer that stuff on there, and I'm using like a 2.5 tip. So a lot of things you're going to be able to come back and fix the little imperfections. You're going to block it. And the first thing that I do before I even sand is take some spray paint and blow on a dust coat, what they normally call a guide coat. Now, you can buy dry guide coat. It's like a powder with a little bobber thing that you put it on. It works great, but I mean, spray paint, if you just quickly dust, it works really well. And let me show you what it looks like. Any little imperfections where you haven't sanded all the way are gonna show up because you haven't sanded that guide coat off, or any low spots and things like that. So for the most part, this is so far up under the car, I don't really care about that edge being a little not perfect. But for the most part, I've gone through and sanded that guide coat all the way off, and then there's places that I had to go up and touch the body work a little bit. So, you know, this area where they probably had a separate piece of the mold to put these fins on, you're gonna see a seam line there. And it doesn't mean that the part has a seam all the way through, because underneath it looks like all one piece. But it could be the way that their mold is set up. So you're gonna end up having to do a little bit of body work to get that right. And even though most of that's under the car, that's fine. I just do it anyway because I don't want to take the risk of it showing. Same on this other side. This is the driver's side running board, and I had to do the body work there the same. So that's pretty much the process so far. Remember, you're gonna sand the gel coat really good with the 80 like we've done on other parts. You know, do a really nice heavy 2 to 3 coats of the poly primer. It's polyester. Remember, I use Slick Sand by Evercoat, and it's good thick stuff, but man, you better have a good respirator and some good paint loop fans, because that is, my filters are all jacked up right now. Don't look at that. But that stuff is extremely potent with the fume. So same thing here. A lot of these areas where you get close to the edge of the fin, you're gonna have some body work to kind of do just because of the imperfections. On these pieces here, I skim coated across the top just because, you know, it kind of needed it the way the part was formed and whatnot. But yeah, so I still have guide coat here. You can see I haven't sanded it all off yet, but I'm working on it. And that kind of gives you a little bit more of an idea how it looks. So keep sanding it down until you get all that guide coat off, then you know you're prepped well. And we're gonna get these things sprayed hopefully tonight. I've got, like I said, the 2 angle pieces, the 2 splitter pieces, my 2 running boards, and then I just threw that one little wing trim piece in the mix. I might wait to work that one, I don't know, but maybe I'll just do the other one, get it caught up. But either way, you know, I'm working on 7 different pieces right now, so that's my process, and it's pretty fail safe. I feel like by the time you go through and you put on really good coats of poly primer, and then you sand it, do your body work, and then you go on and put 3 really good coats of the, like some good 2K primer. By the time you get done sanding that, these parts should be pretty good to go. I mean, there's not really any big dents or any crazy, I mean, it's fiberglass, so you're not like dealing with body damage. You're just getting out like mold imperfections and stuff like that, but it's all totally normal for fiberglass. Now I wanted to do a little bit of a follow-up on these studs that I installed for these trim pieces. So you can see now that they're completely gone. You know, I filled in the resin and then even primed over it after all that was good. But these things are rock solid. I love the way they came out. I mean, they're good and strong. There's a little resin underneath to, you know, that stabilized them, and then I did it from the top as well, so they'll never come out. They were countersunk in, and you can see it if I do it with one hand. They go in pretty easily. I think I do the top first. Let's see. Maybe it's the bottom first, I don't know. But yeah, so top. So the top one and then the bottom one kind of slides in. Maybe it's both at the same time. There they go. Alright. So now there's that piece, and there's one more screw that stabilizes this part that goes up under here. And I'll probably fill that hole in. That was just something I did when I was first test fitting the pieces on. But yeah, that's pretty cool. I love the way those studs work, and then there's hardware that you put on from the inside, and it squeezes it nice and tight against the car out here. So that worked out really well. Now you're gonna see in this section, I've primed and painted, you know, the running boards and the little splitter pieces, but I haven't painted all the trim. I was priming, you know, more of it before I had all those little pieces, but there's still some fitting work that needs to be done. So that's what I'm gonna cover here, talking about the grills going in. Also a little bit towards the end, I'm gonna show you guys how I mounted those little pieces that go on the roof wing. You know, there's just some things that have been kind of uncovered here, and I'd like to at least fill you in on it a little bit. So things will seem a little bit backwards and out of place, but don't worry, there's a method to the madness, and this is just going to kind of catch you up a little bit. Not all the trim is painted yet, you know, once again, but I did a few pieces just to kind of have fun with it, and you know, showing that last section we went through the whole process. So here we go. Okay, I got to a point where I wanted to mess a little bit with the grill mesh that goes in those trim pieces. Now once you get a few of them fitted, and you know, you've got them where they're kind of on the car, you can see a little bit more clearly of how you need to cut this stuff. Now you can kind of decide how you want it to sit, you know, and get it to where maybe the little ovals are straight. Of course, always, you know, rough cut a piece that's bigger, so that when you get it to where it at least sets on the car, you can adjust it the way that you want it, and then cut any excess that's just too much. You know, you can come back and you're gonna have to end up cutting it, you know, at least probably twice on a couple of the sides. But anyway, it's not too bad. I was using, I think, the little body saw with the little blade that they use, and I forgot, you know, how many teeth or whatever. It doesn't really matter because this stuff cuts pretty easily. But you know, I'd lay the trim piece on it, mark it out from the inside, and know that I needed to add a little bit so that it overlaps from behind a bit. So it's not too bad. This was kind of cool. You know, it's like one of those things you can do without really getting your clothes dirty. I want to install some of this honeycomb grill stuff, and this is the smaller one that I ordered. I want to say probably about the size of a dime from end to end, and then you're looking at somewhere around 1/4 of an inch plus a little for the hole. Actually, it's probably more like, yeah, I guess it could be somewhere around a quarter. I mean, I think it's about a 1/4 inch thick. So, yeah. I think it's gonna look the best for the grill to run sideways like this. Now, this stuff does have a couple different directions that it could go. It looks like, if you look at it close enough, well, it almost looks like one side of it slants that way a little bit more than the other side. So I feel like if you look at it from one way, it's gonna look a little different than if you look at it the other way. But then again, it also depends on the light that you're under and whatnot. So it's a little hard to tell, but I feel like it does have some bit of a directional, you know, angle to it. So what I want to do is, I think I'm going to get these to where they go side to side. So basically, if you're looking at this piece down here, the long side is going to lay long ways like that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my little gauge. I took some thin stirring sticks, and 3 pieces just so happened to be like the perfect thickness to match this grill. And what I'm going to do, I wrapped a little bit of tape around it. It's the thickness plus a little bit, so that if you get that grill to fit nicely behind this trim piece, you know, you got a little bit of room for when there's paint on here. So, you know, that's one thing. It needs to have a little bit of play for some primer and paint, but if you go all the way around, you can make marks and make sure that your gauge fits in there. And that's what I'm gonna do. So I'm gonna mark all the way around, then I'm gonna come back and cut this inside out. And once I get the grill to fit properly, then I'll know this will be ready to paint. Okay, this stuff seems to be working pretty well. I went ahead and did both the top and the bottom, and I know some people are cutting all the way out up here and they're bending that piece. I don't really see a reason why to do that. I think I'm gonna be okay just smoothing that out. There's some, you know, fiberglass inconsistency there, but I think I'm just gonna end up smoothing mine out and then painting that part, because you just don't really, I don't know, I feel like the grill going there is all that I really need. It kind of matches the bottom, so that's totally up to you. Now, before we end this little section, I want to show you the one that I got for the rear. I actually bought 2 of these sheets, and this is closer to probably the size of a US quarter. So, you know, somewhere around an inch, maybe an inch and an eighth or inch and a quarter long. But this is the stuff that you're gonna use back here on the rear pieces. So it's gonna go here, and then also the bigger panel that runs across the middle there. So that's the bigger size. And this one definitely has a bit of an angular difference. Like if you look at it straight on, this is straight, and you can see that these little flats here, they actually angle more that way. So I think I'm gonna make it to where water always runs down away from the car, which means, you know, just like kind of a rule of thumb, for me at least, if you put it up here, you see that these pieces are set up to where if water hits it, you know, it's less likely to run inward. It's gonna run off these like a roof. So, you know, that's a very minute detail, but it's kind of just one of those things I pay attention to. I don't know, not that it really ever matters. I mean, water's gonna get behind it anyway, but you know. Okay, while we're talking about trim pieces, now I feel like I might have gotten carried away. I don't know if I videoed or talked about this in a previous, you know, episode before, but I installed the studs the same way that I did for these pieces. Now I know I've covered that, where we put a screw, like a countersunk screw through it. You know, I put the nut on, I put some resin flocks, that way we get that stud to stay. Then I also do a little bit more resin putty from underneath once this piece is back off, so that it really stabilizes that stud screw, and this is always ready to go in. Now, as far as the top, this was a little tricky because if you're going to cut this out completely and do the grill the way some people are doing it, this may not work for you. But since I'm keeping my piece intact up here, what I did was I installed the wing nut size. So I'm using all 8-32, I guess that's the size and the thread that I'm using on these. So I got one of the wing nuts and I literally taped it. You know, you prep the underside of this wing back here. You know, sand it really good with some 36 grit so you know the resin's gonna stick as you would anywhere. But I taped one of the wing nuts back there and I smeared, you know, some of the resin flocks around it where I could get it to stick to this roof wing panel. And what I wanted to do was have enough on there to where I could put this screw through. You know, I had already pre-drilled a hole. I wanted to put the screw in and get it to thread into that wing nut so that when that resin dries, I know that that wing nut's gonna sit exactly where I want it to be for this trim piece to go on. Now that needs to line up because the roof wing and where you fasten this trim piece down here are two different things. You've got, you know, the wing and you've got the body. So anytime you put that wing back on, you want to make sure that you're just really accurate. You know, of course my holes are small. Everywhere I build, I try to keep the holes as small as possible instead of having so much adjustment. And then that way, when this, you know, goes back together, I know that this is gonna go here, and then this screw should be able to line right up with that roof wing where I've installed the wing nut. So that's one method for doing that. And like I said, I thought that I had already covered this at some point, but maybe I didn't. I might have even taken a video and maybe it got lost in my old phone or something, as we've upgraded phones recently. So there you go. That's how this is gonna work for mine. And of course, even though the wing nut is temporarily held on, when I pull all this apart again to do the paint work, I'm gonna go back and prep that resin that's already underneath there, and I'm gonna really fill it in nice so that if you were to take this piece off, you'd just see a hump, and that would be the resin flocks with the wing nut embedded in it. And it's just gonna, you know, it'll look really nice, even though you're never gonna see it. Right now, that wing nut that's back there, it just doesn't look nice. It's just kind of roughly glued to the bottom of that roof wing. And you can see where I did, it's pretty much right on this outer line if you lined it up with that and then the curve. So there you go. That's how that piece is going to be held on. Okay, as I said, we're going to pick up with the hood and the latching and stuff like that now. Now this did take a while, but I feel like it was worth the wait. I got a lot deeper into this, but I feel like that's just what had to happen. You know, as you saw way back on the trunk lid, I had to actually cut the seam and separate the two half shells to get certain parts of the trunk to bond together tighter. And it seemed to fix everything I was having issues with. Now I did the same thing here on the hood, and you're gonna see that. Sometimes it just really takes going back a few steps further than what you thought you might have to. And I'm gonna say, as much as, I mean, I understand building these fiberglass parts, it's got to be a challenge. You never know who's in the shop putting these parts together. This was maybe the most disappointing part to me with, you know, dealing with the kit, because I feel like the hood was pretty much unusable to me. You know, I'm going to show you some parts in here where the hood might have been sitting flat at the nose and flat at the back, but then as it curved up, it sat 3/4 of an inch higher than like the side fender. And that's just kind of unacceptable, you know, but I had to do what I had to do. I realized that the hood was too thick, and it's just because the inner shell and the outer shell were not bonded together properly. Whoever they might have had putting that together at the time, you just never know. I'm sure things might be better now, and I mean, there's got to be struggles with building a car kit like this, but you know, that's just one of those things I kind of feel like that's a huge headache, you know, and anybody that you're expecting to try and put something like this together, you know, even with like some good experience, this would still be quite a head scratcher. And I mean, I can only thank all my previous, you know, aircraft and composite experience to be able to notice something like this and know the way to actually correct it. So that was probably my biggest hassle when it came to doing this hood. Once I did that, I basically had to start over with everything I had done as far as how the fitment went and how high I had the hinges raised. And once I got it to where I felt like it sat good, then I got to where I could actually install a latch. So here we go. We're going to get into it. This is kind of an important section. There was just so much going on with this thing, and it was really a head scratcher for a while, but I had to tear into it and figure it out. Okay, so right now I'm going back and trying to get the hood to raise up a little bit more on the left side. Now, on the passenger side, it was sitting about 1/16 of an inch too high last time I checked it. But I had a certain amount of spacers in there and I measured them out to be somewhere around 1/4 of an inch. So I'm going to mound 1/4 inch. That's what I put here, greater than or less than 1/4, because it could have been a little bit less and then you can shim it. On this side, I pretty much determined that I need to mound up about 1/2 an inch to get that hinge to sit where I need it. So the sides were a little bit different, or maybe on the hood, I don't know, something's different. But what I'm doing for this is I'm building out of paint stir sticks. I've glued 3 pieces together, and this is basically a spacer. So what I'm going to do, I might even check the hood with it before I fiberglass it all in. But if all this works just right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to fiberglass this right over the holes, and I'm going to build a little mound so that the hinge is going to sit on this mound and it's always going to be there. And then I'm going to use some, what is this, 5/16, something like that, I don't know. I forgot what thickness this is. It's a little bit thicker than 1/4. So I've got this steel plate and I'm going to tap holes and thread those underneath. And these are actually going to be welded to a bracket that's going to go under here, and it's going to be installed to where I don't have to worry about holding nuts or tightening anything from the bottom. I'm basically going to be able to put the bolts for the hood hinges straight down into this area without having to worry about getting inside the grill or anything like that. So that's what I'm doing. I'm hoping all this works, but just like everything else, you kind of figure it out as you go. This is a lot like what I did on the roof wing, where I had to add those little mounds, but I had washers in them because I had a pretty definite height. So this is what I figure is going to work here. I'm trying the stir stick idea. Super glue 3 pieces together, shave them down a little bit, and gonna test fit it and see how it works. For those metal plates that I was gonna use metal brackets or something to fasten to the bottom of the body, I actually decided to fiberglass them, and I found a way to get them to stay, using the bolt, so that I could actually use some resin and get them to just be permanently mounted underneath. So that's really cool. That's the way that I did that, and you're gonna see that I'm drilling those little plates and kind of getting that done. It made things a lot easier whenever I'm putting the hood on and taking it off. So I made these thread plates, and they're not perfectly symmetrical, but they don't really have to be. So basically, my hood bolts that are going to hold the hinges to the car thread right into these pretty much perfectly. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to mount these plates underneath the areas where I built the mounds. So what I basically did is built the mounds here, and this one seems like it's way higher than that side, but that was how much it seemed like they needed to go when I was kind of doing the hood fitting. Now, if for some reason this ends up being way too high, I can just grind it down. It's all, you know, pretty much resin flocks. There's a little bit of wood in there I had made out of those stirring sticks. But for the most part, this could be taken down if I had to, but I really feel like that's just the way it needs to go, and it's going to end up getting primed over and sanded real nice. I needed to cut in right here and explain why one of those mounds was higher. Now, I found this problem when I decided to rebond the seams of the hood together. And what it was the same issue that was causing the driver's side of the hood to be too high over the fender. And, you know, we're going to get more into this as I was doing it, but I found it out after this was kind of filmed. It was the same issue on the front of the hood. One side of the hood was bonded together pretty nice, and then the other side of the hood was just way too thick, like there was just too much putty between there. So it was making one side of the hood sit lower than the other. And I feel like I've seen this on pictures of other Vaydors that have been built where they didn't try to correct the way that the hood sat. It seems like it was pretty consistent that the passenger side of the hood nose always seems to sit higher than the driver's side. So mine had to be corrected, and once I seamed the hood back together on the really bad areas, it corrected all these problems, and I was able to grind the larger mound down to where it pretty much almost matched the one on the passenger side. But in a way it was nice because I had too much, so I was able to just step by step kind of lower it down until I got the hood, you know, exactly where I wanted it. I would take the hood off, grind a little more, put it back on, and repeat that process until I got these things to sit exactly how I wanted it to. These thread plates are made to fit right up underneath, and I'm gonna fiberglass those, or basically, you know, bond them with the resin and whatnot. I'm gonna put the bolts in so they hold, and then I'm gonna put maybe a few layers of glass up under here, and probably kind of hard to see right now. Yeah, anyway. We go right over there. There'll be a few layers of glass that just get, you know, kind of put over it. And that should hold those plates in place. And the main goal here is it's one less thing to mess with, one less thing that's gonna move. If I just put bolts through the holes, you know, they're gonna move a little bit. But what I want is when I put my hood hinges on, I want to know that the bolts at least are always in the exact same place. And the hood hinge is going to have some adjustment because the holes for the hood hinge are oversized compared to the bolts. So you're going to get the adjustment there. Of course, you try to get this as close as possible, but there's going to be adjustment at the hood hinge. And I'm hoping that these heights are correct to where the hood's going to sit the way that I want it to. And of course, you'll have the bolts that go into the hood itself, but you just have to try to make really good markings for those and try to put that back together right every time. So that's where I'm at. You can see I've taken some really good sharp 36 grit on my die grinder. You want to use a brand new piece and get some really good, you know, scratches in the steel because you want all this to bond together really good. I mean, it probably doesn't matter a lot because I'm going to be building like a little mound of resin and flocks over this piece of steel, but I still like everything to bond together nice and tight. And what I'm going to do is before I put this plate on from underneath, I'm going to use the bolts to hold it while the resin's being, you know, applied. But what you want to do is I'm gonna smear a little bit of the resin flocks mixture, a real thin coat on here first. That way, when I put it up underneath there and I bolt them together, you're gonna have some of that resin mixture in between that's gonna, you know, allow this piece to bond pretty nice. You know, it's gonna take up any voids, any space. It's gonna, you know, basically glue it to the fiberglass. And then whenever you build the mound over it with, you know, some flocks mixture around here, then we're gonna do a couple layers of actual glass cloth. And it's gonna hold in so nice and tight that this thing should never move. But I like to bond the actual piece. That way it's not just, you know, dry under here. So you can either smear it on there where the plate's gonna go, or you can put it on the plate. But either way, I like to have some resin mix between there. So both sides are ready to go. I'm gonna probably just show time-lapse video of this side, but you'll see how it's done that way. Alright, another task complete. So I was able to fiberglass the plates to the bottom, and that's going to allow me to bolt the hood hinges on just from the top without having any nuts or anything under there. See, I've already added the glass up here, which I was talking about earlier, so I need to grind that down and make it look nice. But here's the other one, and I couldn't get the cleanest fiberglass job. I mean, when you're working up under here, I could have taken the front end off, I guess, but I wanted to leave it on so that I could start fitting the hood as soon as this stuff's cured. So anyway, there's the thread plates. They're embedded in the front end now, so should be able to put the hood on and off a little easier. Now I got the metal thread plates installed underneath, and they're, you know, fiberglass resin's dry, can't really see it. What I'm doing is I'm just drilling the fiberglass that's at the very bottom that's under the plate, so that when I put a bolt in, it doesn't just jam through that little layer of fiberglass. So I just drilled it out with a smaller bit than the threads so I don't tear the threads up. And I'm just gonna run the tap through it just to clean it out and just basically, you know, make sure that the bolt's gonna go through smooth, and so that's why you do that. Of course, at this point, this is where it becomes a little bit easier to fit the hood, because now I've got those thread plates, which means I'm not going to be messing with holding nuts under there. I'm not going to be messing with that moving at all. It's pretty much always in the same spot. Even though the hinge moves, I know that my bolts are going to go into a same consistent location. So we're going to fit the hood on and off a few times and kind of see how it goes. Got a shout out to my good friend Erin. You'll see her in here. Now, she's a wonderful nurse, and you know, she's always loved music and she loves the piano restoration, so I've been teaching her how to restore pianos, and she happened to be working on a piano on the stage. So I had her come in and help me look at a few things and see if we could get this to line up right. Now, one thing that's really tough about trying to create a series and be organized and doing a build like this is there's so many unknowns. There's things that I'm gonna assume and things that I'm gonna kind of put in the video, and then later I might realize that, well, I shouldn't have did that, or I should have changed it. So I'm trying to keep you guys basically up with the whole process, and I'm trying to make this as genuine and accurate just so you guys can see what I've actually gone through to build this car. And this is one of those kind of unforeseen things, you know, having to basically separate the inner and outer hood shells in a lot of areas and seam them back together. And I kind of explained that this was going to happen before, but in this section I'm going to show you guys exactly what I did and how, you know, it made a huge difference. I mean, as soon as I spent the time to do this, it made this hood fit so much better. And it's kind of unfortunate, but it's just those things that you do when you're building such a cool looking car, I guess. So here it goes, and yeah, this part wasn't fun, but hey, it solved some problems, so there we go. Okay, so I had hoped I wasn't gonna have to get into deep surgery on this hood, but what I'm realizing is that this curve of the undershell, it lays in the fender pretty good. But the top is having trouble, okay? And look how thick it is. This isn't right. Now, if you look at the other side, it's clamped together really good. So, see how thin you can get it right there? I mean, it's hard to tell from the camera, but there's a big difference between the thickness. And this side actually matches the passenger side fender pretty good. So what I think I'm gonna do, I did this on the trunk lid, and it seemed to help out a lot. And I'm gonna do it on the hood now. So I made marks with tape, basically from here all the way to almost the end is where the curve is just a little too high for the fender. So I'm gonna literally separate the two shells. I'm gonna cut the edge, and I'm gonna separate the inner shell. I'm gonna have to probably get a Sawzall. It's kind of tricky sometimes to get it started, but you gotta cut the bond and then clean out as much of the fiberglass putty that was holding it together, and then get this to clamp together tighter. So right now this is literally about almost 3/4 of an inch at the worst point. And I want these to clamp together like the other side, you know, maybe 1/4 inch or so, maybe, yeah. I mean, literally, this isn't, I mean, it's barely, you know, it's a big difference. So that's what I'm gonna do. Now, as far as the front, I might decide, I don't think this is as bad. I mean, this side is okay. This side definitely has some issues with how thick it is right here. I could definitely stand to cut that apart and then squeeze this together a bit. But I don't know, this side seems to be fine. So yeah, I mean, just kind of thinking out loud here, but that's what's going on. I don't like that it's so asymmetrical, and I'm also thinking that has a lot to do with why it rubs when it opens and closes, just because there's so much extra thickness here. So we'll see what I can do with it. And that was the part I was talking about. I ended up cutting more of the hood on the sides than I thought that I would. I wanted to correct as much of this as I thought was really going to make a difference, and it really did. As a matter of fact, that was probably 99% of the issue with the hood sitting improperly in the front. You know, once I fixed all these seams, I mean, you'll see everything just became easier for me, and it all made more sense. Alright, I wanted to take a short little clip just to show, you know, if you're not already convinced that this is not pressed together all the way, you can look inside and literally see where I start to cut through. As soon as the wheel breaks through the resin and the putty, there's just air back there. So it's pretty easy to cut through this seam. And you can see I just got to go a little bit more. If it's too deep, I'll use the Sawzall in some of those places. But for the most part, we're getting a pretty clean cut through. And then you got to clean out the thickness, because there's going to be some thickness from the excess resin or resin putty that was used. So for the most part, this is going to go hopefully pretty smooth, but you just got to make sure, you know, when you put it back together, got a good bit of clamps. So there's that. We're going to keep cutting this and see if I can get this seam to lay together real nice. Now, as I go on with this, I'm more and more confident that this is going to save some time, or at least solve some of my issues with what's going on, because I cut this with a cutoff wheel, which you can see clearly that's the thickness, and I haven't made it all the way through right there yet, so it's still holding open. But as soon as I made it all the way through, you can see how that gap tightens. So this thing literally, it can come apart right now, but it literally wants to squeeze together tighter. So as I clean some of this, and you can see if I could gap this open far enough, you'd be able to see where the original shell part was formed and where the resin putty is just kind of, you know, smeared in there. Like, you can see what needs to be cleaned away to get this to flatten out better. So I'm kind of excited. I think this is gonna work good. And I really just need to come to back here, you know, and try to get it cleaned out as much as possible. The other thing is I'm gonna cut a little bit of this top edge off and try to clean into the, you know, try to grind a little bit out where it's gonna sit and it's actually gonna recess in, because if you look, the original way that this should have been is you have, you know, what's the top surface of the hood rolls over, and then the inner shell is, I think, supposed to set into it kind of like a tray, but it's like you only get one chance to do that right. And if it's not sandwiched together good enough, it's just gonna be, you know, you have to cut it apart. So that's what I'm doing. And I wanna try to get it kind of like it was originally, where I can clean into that outer shell a little bit and get this, you know, inner piece to actually lay into it kind of flat. But we'll see. The main thing that really matters is getting this curve corrected enough to where the hood is going to lay right when it's closed. Now you can see I'm at it again. This was a long night, and I mean, I spent a good 2.5, I mean at least 2 to maybe 2.5, almost 3 hours, you know, cutting on this thing, trying to make sure that I did it enough, because when I go in to do the resin and, you know, get it bonded back together, I wanted it to be ready and not have to stop and, you know, cut more. So I really took the time to make sure that this thing was going to bond together properly, and it did. But it was a long process, and I definitely was glad to shower off all that fiberglass dust. Alright, I really hope the worst of this little task is over. I've spent the last 3 hours probably going around this thing and cutting these 2 half shells apart in the places where it needed to be done. Now, you're gonna have to kind of fade, you know, your cut or whatever. You just have to go further than what you need. So I mean, I wanna make sure at my tape mark that I'm able to sandwich this thing together pretty tight. And that just means that it's gonna kind of fade up here. Now I'm still gonna clamp it a little bit, but you don't want this to have a really dramatic bend. You just want it to flow. So this is way better. You know, earlier I was probably 3/4 of an inch. I don't know. It was way too thick. And now when I push these pieces together, I mean, I literally get it to sandwich down to about 1/4 of an inch or so. That's crazy. So this is gonna be way better. And I just made my way to the front, and same thing, it's gonna kind of fade out up here. You know, just I'm gonna gradually clamp it a little bit, but I'll make sure it's nice and tight in the areas where it was just way too thick. Now I'll come around to the front. I know this is gonna be a lot better. You know, this side was a little tighter, so I left it, but then over here it's gonna need to be clamped. So I got that to where it's gonna sandwich down really nice. And it's already wanting to set down better. You know, you'll find that when you cut these things apart, if they're put together kind of, I don't know what it is about this, but it's like maybe they were put together tight or clamped in a couple places, and then maybe the resin was too thick. I don't know how it happened. It almost looks like they could have had some really thick resin or something here, the putty, however it's mixed. And it looks like it was clamped really tight here. That's why this has like an indentation, which I'm gonna have to grind out later when I do all the touch-up work. I'm gonna grind that out and fill it. It looks like it was clamped there, maybe clamped at this corner, and then this is really thick. But this wasn't a problem. Passenger side was pretty good. I'm just doing this because this needed to come down a little bit more here. And it also makes it flow better with me making the front tighter. If I tried to do the front and not some of this side, it was just gonna be forcing that area. So I feel like this is gonna be pretty good. And that's where we're at. I'm gonna use the resin and mix up some putty and get this all bonded back together. So hopefully I can start refitting it as soon as it's cured.
Now this should further clarify. If you see the way that I was pushing the two halves together, you can literally see that where the bolts go to the hinge, it's thinning the overall thickness of the hood, which means that would be the area where it was setting too high. So it just makes sense. I mean, getting this thing to set together a little bit more consistently is gonna correct the problems, and it did.
Now, one method for getting resin into these tight areas, and since I want to make sure I get some of that putty, you know, at least far enough back to bond this whole edge here and make it nice and strong. So these are syringes that I ordered off eBay a while back, and you can see it's a blunt tip, just a straight tip needle, and it's perfect for, you know, like resin. You can mix the putty fairly thick and it'll still go through the needle, but you know, if it gets too thick, you might have trouble getting it to siphon in there. But at least I can use that to put it inside of there, and it's gonna, you know, be a lot easier to get my resin putty into the places I need it. And once you clamp it together, of course, it's gonna squeeze out a bit. So that's how you know that you get a good fill on it.
Now the way this process works is I used my syringe to put some resin in the gap, and I wanted to put just enough where I knew it was going to cover any surface that touched together. You know, so you're going to have it where it's, you know, putting it pretty far in there, but you know it's going to squeeze inward and outward a little bit. And what was great was I judged it just right to where when I clamped the pieces together, I had just a little bit that squeezed out, which meant now I could continue that from the outside. So I could clamp it, I got it to squeeze out, I knew it made a good fill, and when I put on the clamps, then, you know, I could just go and kind of finish off the edge where it was a little bit nicer. Now, one thing I did before starting this was I actually put on the two end clamps just to see how tight that I wanted them to go, so that I had a pretty good idea of how to get that seam to gradually clamp together. Instead of clamping really tight on the sides, like I said, I didn't want a really dramatic change. So it's gonna be wise to take your clamps first and get a feel for how tight you want them to push those ends, and then that way, you know, whenever you do the resin, you've got a feel for how much to actually, you know, pressure those clamps. Now, as far as the vice grips that I used, in those areas, I just wanted it to sandwich as tight as possible. You know, not so tight that it was gonna put teeth marks into the panel, but I got it to do it pretty tight where I knew that it was touching, and that was gonna give me the maximum, you know, improvement here.
All right, it's been a long night. I'm pretty sure the sun's about to come up, but I got this driver's side edge to clamp together super thin, and I'm hoping that's gonna solve my problem of the hood being too high over the fender. So you can see, man, it's gonna look way better. I mean, I've got, of course, some excess resin that I'm gonna have to sand down, but that's how you always have to do it. The front looks pretty uniform now. It's hard to tell from the video, but both sides look like they're about the same thickness, which is great. It was thicker on this side. And then carrying over here to what would be the passenger side, it was pretty close, but since I had to move that corner, I just needed to go a little further with it. So hopefully this corrects a few of my fitment problems for the hood and we can move along. The clamps are off. I don't think this could have come out any better. I got this line really nice and thin. I, sandwiched the halves of the hood together tighter, and this came out really good. It's kind of my resin and flocked cotton mixture. So I just got to go around. I'm gonna grind all the excess off. There's gonna be a little bit I need to fill in right there. I think there was a clamp and it was hard for me to try to get the stuff in there, but it's okay. The front is good and even now. It's definitely better than it was. And this side is the biggest improvement because this edge was literally like 3/4 of an inch thick. So this is really nice and tightly put together. Now I'm hoping that the hood fits better. I feel like it's either gonna be better or worse. So we're gonna grind the excess and then I'll just kind of set it on, see how it fits just with it sitting. And then I'm gonna bolt it to the hinges again and try to start the process of actually aligning it properly. Okay, so right now I just have the hood setting on the hinges. I just got done, you know, I refiberglassed the seams together in those certain areas, and I got done cleaning up all the excess and kind of going around the edge and make sure it was pretty nice. There's still some little color there I need to get rid of from that that gray that I had put on it. But check it out, like everything is so much better. So even though it looks like it's sitting high right here, what's actually going on is I don't have it bolted down to the hinges. I just set it there because I wanted to look at it. But I can already tell that the curve is going to be so much better with the side of the fender. And I know the light's kind of throwing things off right now because you see this hole here in the gap and whatnot. So don't pay attention to it. It looks really bad in the camera from what I can see. But it's actually going to be a lot more workable once I, you know, bolt this back to the hinge. And then I can tell just from the way it sits, it just seems to want to fit so much better in so many more areas. Whereas before, it was like, you know, it might fit in the front, but it didn't fit right over there. Or, you know, it's like the curve was too high because the seam was 3/4 of an inch thick. Now, it's literally maybe 1/4 of an inch. I mean, yeah. I mean, it's crazy. So this whole curve is gonna be so much better. And like I said, it's only sitting here. I'm gonna have the latch adjusted over there. I'm gonna have this area, it's gonna be lower because now, and I don't understand how this works. I mean, it's got something to do with the way the hood was put together very sloppily, I guess. But earlier, you know, in whatever the week, I was trying to get this hinge higher. So I raised that little, you know, I made that mound to raise the hinge up. Well, you would think that now it would still be the same height, but for some reason, just by correcting the issues that I was having, it actually made this too high, which means that now this can go back down. I can literally grind off some of that mound that I built and just leave what I need to be the perfect spacing. And then when that happens, the curve should line up pretty nice. And gosh, it's already so much better than it was. I mean, literally it was like if this was fitting before, it was, I mean, probably 3/4 of an inch taller here, but then it would bow down and match with the top. So that was extremely worth the work. The hours that I spent cutting the seams, you know, I did a lot on that side, a little bit on the front, maybe half of it, and then some on that side, and everything just seems so much better. And the hood is only sitting there. It's not even bolted down or anything yet. So that just might be something you have to do if your hood was put together the way mine was. So moving along. Everything just makes so much more sense now. I mean, it lines up with the curve. It can fit here, it can fit here. I mean, the only thing that's actually holding it up now is the thing that I changed to try and compensate for the old way that the hood was. That's easy to undo.
So you can see I went through quite a process to get this hood to fit the way that it fits now. Oh, man. Like, I mean, and just to think that it shouldn't have to be that way. You know, there was so much extra involved with that. But I mean, you know, it's worth it. That's what it takes to do this car, right? I mean, okay. But overall, in all honesty, I mean, there was, you know, just really from front to back, things just were a little bit easier, you know, and even though I kind of had to start over with fitting the hood, it's just so much, it's more to work with now. I feel like it was almost unworkable for me the way that it was, but now it's like totally workable. Being that now I was on a good straight and narrow path for finishing this hood fitment, there were a few really cool things that I did. You know, I wanted to make it easier for me to reinstall the hood. So I actually, when I was taking the mounds down a little bit, you know, I realized that the hood was actually going to open better if it was sitting a little bit lower. And then if I needed to build some body filler up on that front nose, that was going to be the easier route instead of leaving the hinges sitting high. So I found that if I etched into my little fiberglass mounds a little bit, I followed the trace of the hinge, and what that did was it allowed the hinge to recess into that mound a little bit, and it also gave me pretty much an exact point where every time I set those hinges on, I know where they need to go. They're really only going to sit in one place because now they're recessed into the fiberglass. So that's a little bit of a nice little cheat so that you don't have to try and realign the hood every time you put the hinges on. Now, if you guys are, you know, building this car, you've ordered through the company and all that, you've most likely been in touch with Melvin. And he's been really cool about, you know, letting me just kind of ask questions whenever, and he, you know, he'll send me videos or pictures or even give you a call whenever he's trying to explain something. And this was one of those, you know, where he had kind of said before, well, there's certain hood latch he's using, but he had also thought trying maybe the BMW latches. I thought BMW might be a good one because I've owned BMWs and I've seen how they just have that nice little plunger that locks in. You know, it's not like the hook thing and whatever. So I figured I would order some, you know, BMW latches. I'll talk more about that, but that's basically what I went with. I got the ones that can fit like an E46 or, you know, a really common latch, and I was able to even use the G35 hardware that easily threads right into those latches. It's like those self-threading screws or bolts, and the G35 had so many of those that I saved it. It just happened to fit this hood latch, so that was pretty cool, and that's what we're going to cover now. So I ordered a BMW hood latch set, and this is, it says E46, E39. I know I had an E46. I never had to replace these, but apparently they fit a bunch of different BMWs. So I got two of them. Now I don't know, I've heard that you can latch one side of the hood, maybe the driver's side. I guess whichever side is tend to sit higher. And I've heard that's okay, so I might just try to do it with one, and then if I need to add the second, I'll add it. But what I found is that it looks like these holes are built to where you can thread tap them. So the metal's kind of stamped and you can see it's thick in there. So you can thread tap that, which is kind of cool. And I've got some of this, actually I have a lot of this. It's meant for strapping, you know, a first and second floor together in a building. It's some stuff I used to get when I did my construction work. So what's cool is the holes that are pre-drilled. It makes things a little easier. They actually line right up with these BMW hood latches. So if you can find, I think this is like Simpson Strong Tie or something like that. It's usually stamped on. I think I already cut a piece off of this one. But if you go get, I think this stuff's made by Simpson, and it's just, you know, construction material for tying whatever your, you know, first and second floor or two different floors together. But that's kind of cool. So I'm going to drill these holes out to accept the bolts. First I'm going to tap these and figure out what size bolts I'm going to use, and then I'm going to drill these out. And what I'm planning to do, the only reason I'm building this bracket is because of the angle on here. Now if you come over here to the car, this fiberglass is pretty stiff, and I feel like for holding one side of the latch it's going to be fine. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to build another angled bracket that bolts back here, and it's going to set real nice. You know, I'm going to have it to where it sits in here really good or whatever. Maybe it'll go around that little, probably drill the hole out to where it'll fit around this little piece.
And I'm gonna have one bracket that goes down and bolts to the body. And whether I gotta use a nut or shoot a rivet nut in there, I don't know yet. But I'll be able to figure that out. And what it looks like will work is if I can use this triangle to mount the hood latch, I'll be able to get it in that ballpark where this is, I think. I don't know. I still need to do some measurements, but my plan right now is to build a bracket that's gonna hold this latch in here straight. Because if I just bolted it through the body like that, it's gonna sit up and it's gonna have too much of an angle. So I'm gonna build a little bracket that's gonna basically come down and allow this to sit flat. And then the other side of that bracket is gonna maybe use like 3 or 4 screws that go through the body here. So that's the plan I have so far. I'm gonna see how this works. I haven't really even seen any pictures of where people's hood latches are on the Vaydor, but this is what I feel like I can work with. So we'll see how it goes. Okay, here's what I've got so far to adapt this latch to the body. Now, I took that structural stuff that I had for buildings and cut a piece out of it. So you can kind of see the way that these holes are staggered. It worked out really well to do 3 back here. And then those 2 lined up perfectly with the BMW E46, E39 latch. So I basically cut a little trapezoid. Okay, and I had to put it in the vise because the BMW latch has this little thing but what's cool about that bend is that it actually lowers the latch down. You know, you have to do this. If it was flat, and let's just say it was too easy, you know, if it was flat and you're able to just mount it to here, there's a good chance that this latch was not going to end up low enough. So that little curve that they put in there is actually kind of a, you call it, I don't know, a blessing in disguise, as you know, the religious people would say, because as it curves down, it lowers that latch, and I ended up having to bend my bracket a bit. So you put it in the vise and bend it. Now, one thing to note is you're gonna get it to where it sits pretty straight, you know, this way. But I actually made it to where it's got a little bit of an extra downward to it. So you can see that I didn't make this straight with what the body is going to be. Okay, I've got a little bit of extra downward slope there. The reason why I did that is because when I pulled the hood down and I looked at it, it looks like this area where I'm going to mount the, I don't know, the plunger, I guess we'll call it. It actually looks like this is going to end up sitting a little bit like that. Now, I don't know for sure, but one thing I'm expecting to have to do is I'm expecting to have to take this latch back off. I'm gonna put it on, I'm gonna pop the little plunger into it, and when I bring the hood down, I'm expecting that the angle might be a little bit different. And if it is, I'm just gonna take this back off and I'm gonna bend it to adjust it. And I feel like you should be able to get pretty dang close after, you know, once or twice where it's gonna work and the little plunger is gonna go straight in there the way that it should. So that's what I'm gonna do. Once again, you guys, if you're building this car, I can't stress, oh, that's just temporary, my prop. I can't stress enough, save the G35 hardware and use it. I mean, you can't go buy this stuff at Lowe's. I mean, I don't know, you can get something, but this is, I mean, these are the coolest things. So if you use the Simpson, like I said, I believe it's Simpson strong tie material. Let me show you again. If you use this and you do it exactly the way that I did, now, again, I don't even know that this is gonna work. I'm pretty sure that it is. I think I'll get it to work because I've already checked to make sure that, you know, if you gotta cut a little bit of this bolt off, you can, but I think that the hood is thick enough for it to actually mount over here. And, you know, if I look at it right, it doesn't look like it from the side, but the way that I was holding it up over here a minute ago, it looks like the hood is almost thick enough to where I may not have to cut much of this bolt off to get it to go in there. But anyway, I'm pretty sure it's gonna work. What I'm thinking is I'm gonna pop this in here, and then I'm gonna be able to lay the hood down, and I'm gonna see exactly where to make my markings, and that's how I'm gonna know where to drill that first hole, because you want to get that bolt to go in the hood first, like when I shut it down. So I'm gonna get that to work, and then I'm gonna find my bolt holes. You know, I'm gonna trace this and figure out exactly how I want it to sit. But what I was saying before is this hardware, I mean, if this works out, this couldn't have been any easier. Okay, what's cool about the hardware is a lot of these bolts are self-threading, and this piece of steel plate was about 1/8 of an inch thick, and what's cool is it'll thread through the holes that are already pre-drilled there. So if you're using this Simpson stuff, and I had a bag that I saved, I put, you know, inner body structure. I guess it was just a lot of the inner body stuff. And these like little rainbow colored, I don't know what that coating is, but whatever these bolts are, there's a ton of them. I want to say a lot of them came from the airbags or something. I can't even remember. But it's really cool because not only do they self-thread into the BMW latch, and they make really nice threads on all 3 holes. You know, I just kind of use the 10mm. Be careful at first, but they also threaded kind of, well, actually really tight into these holes. If anything, you might drill these holes out just, you know, one size. I don't know if you have a full drill index or if you're just going standard sizes, but I was able to use my impact gun and get these things to slowly thread themselves into the holes on this, you know, this construction material. And man, let me tell you, it worked out great. So I like the fact that if you saved all those bolts, you can have some that are, you know, just without the washer. They're nice and flat up under there. Let's see. And then if you have something like the fiberglass, there were some other bolts that had the big washer on it, which, you know, you can see that I used here. And that's amazing. I think this is gonna work great. I hope that it does, because I like the way that it looks. It looks nice and clean. And how strong is it? Well, when you grab this and move it, this feels pretty strong as far as the fiberglass is concerned. But man, putting that metal plate under there, it really stiffened it up. I mean, I feel like this latch would easily hold the hood down by itself. But what I'm gonna do is I'm still gonna add my little brace I was talking about. Somehow, I don't know, I might make it where it curls over the top and then it goes down there to the body, and I just, you know, drive it in with a rivet nut or something. But however I end up doing that part, this is gonna make it long term right here. This is gonna keep it from, you know, I mean, gosh, I don't even really see, I don't know how it's so strong. It's flexing a little bit, but just this thing right here is stiffened up so much because of that metal plate that's under it. So I'm pretty happy with this so far. I think it's at least good enough to where I can pop the whatever you want to call it, the part that goes in it. I don't know. I mean, I guess that's the latch, or that is. But I'm gonna go ahead and put it in there, and I'm gonna see if I can mark some holes and get this at least rough fitted to the hood, and see if this is this whole setup's even gonna work.
Okay, one thing that you're not able to see right here is the 3 bolts that hold my homemade bracket to the car. There's actually going to be a spacer between the body underneath and between that bracket. Okay, because what's happening is with it bolted to the car this way, the hood latch was still ending up about 1/8 of an inch too high. So I got some thick washers that I had from Lowe's, and I had actually bought for the doors originally, but I had extras. Now these thick washers were perfect because they were able to space that little bracket down just enough to where my latch is pulling the hood down to the height that I want it. So that's something to definitely note. Don't forget about that. You don't see it here, but It's just something you need to know. Okay, do whatever it takes to get that latch to sit wherever you need it to. And also, I did end up having to cut a little bit off the bolt that goes to the little plunger. And I want to say it was probably somewhere around a 1/2 inch or so, but it wasn't that bad. So the hinges are on. I feel like it's pretty good. For the most part, nothing's really rubbing anymore. It fits good up in the front. Now, what I did up here is I cut the section out where I'm gonna mount the hood latch. And it's this piece, which comes out, you know. But what you wanna do is cut that out, and you wanna lower the hood on it and make sure it's gonna go down low enough for one thing. And also I'm making sure that that piece goes inside the hood, which it does, because now the hood, I gotta like look up under here. I don't know if you can see it that way, no. But you can get your head down far enough and you can actually see that the piece goes into that hole. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bolt, I'm gonna figure out about how high that I need it, which, okay, there we go, that's even lower, that's better. So it actually, all in all, in the end, it's gonna actually set up a little higher. So yeah, see, it's too low, so it goes too low, and that's good because I needed a little bit of extra play. So what I'm gonna do is save the piece that you cut out of there, because what I want to do is I'm gonna actually, here, hold on, let me prop this hood real quick. So my plan is, since this piece came out, my plan is to bolt it together. I'm gonna prep both sides really good with some 36 grit so that, you know, resin will bond to it and all that. But basically, this is just gonna be kind of a filler plate. I could just, you know, make some resin putty and the flocks mixture. I could just flocks a metal plate in there. But what I want to do, and I'm gonna try to do it all in one step if all works well, is I want to make the metal plate. I want to thread it, and then I'm going to use 2 bolts to sandwich this between the metal plate. Okay, so it's going to be like this. The metal plate's going to be on it. And then what I want to happen is I'm going to put a whole bunch of you got to prep the inside of this real good too. And of course you want to bevel this down so that any, you know, your repair can be nice. At least even if you don't get that on the first try, because you're going to set the hood down and just leave it until the resin cures. And then you're going to pop the hood latch to get it out. So basically all of it's going to cure together, and then I'm going to pop the latch, and that's how I'm going to open the hood after that. And it'll still have the bolts that go into the metal plate, which is going to be permanently installed. So that's pretty cool. But you want to prep this all really good so that wherever you put the resin, you know it's going to have a good bond and it's going to stay there. So that's what I'm doing, and I hope it all works the way that I want it to. So far, pretty good with this though. Okay, so in order to explain this a little further, I've got my pieces cut. So what I did was I've got the plate that I made, and that's gonna go in the hood, basically embedded in the hood. Then I've got the fiberglass filler plate, which is the piece that got cut out of the hood. You can see it sandwiched in between there. So what I basically want to do is I'm going to put this in the latch. I'm going to click it in just like this. Alright. Then I'm going to shut the hood down on it. And when the resin and flux is all in there, this whole piece should go inside the hood here. Now it might be kind of tricky to get it to go in, but I think it's going to work. Let's see. Might just have to be kind of maneuvered around a little bit. Anyway, I might have to make some adjustments and cut my hole out, but I'm 95% of the way there. If I can get the hood to lay down on that piece, which it's already going in a little bit, I just need it to set down maybe another 1/4 of an inch. So that other 1/4 of an inch that I needed was achieved by cutting off the 2 bolts that are holding the latch to the metal plate. Basically, that's all that you gotta do. Those bolts were a little bit too long, and that's fine. I figured I'd have to cut them down a bit. But I cut them down to where there was maybe 1 or 2 threads sticking through when it was all tight, and that was just fine. So anyway, it's gonna be closed down on it just like that. And before I do the resin, and put this back out, what I want to do is I'm going to re-separate. I'm going to take this back apart, and I want to put some of my flux mixture between the plate and the fiberglass piece, because I want to basically glue these 2 pieces together. Not the hood latch, obviously. The hood latch is going to be bolted, and then, you know, it's all going to be held down. So whenever I click this in, I'm going to lay the hood down on it, make sure it lays exactly where I want it, and then whenever the resin cures, I'll be able to pop the latch and then open the hood up, and I should be able to take this latch off, or the plunger, whatever you want to call it. So that's what I'm hoping is going to work to finish this little latch situation. And then other than that, I just have to build the bracket that goes from the outside of the latch down to the body. But I don't need that right now because it's holding tight enough. So that's pretty much what I'm doing with this. And once all this gets resin together, it'll be exactly where I need it, and whenever I open the hood, it should just pop right out and know that it's going to close right back in place. Now, of course, this is to get the angles right. There's a little bit of angle kind of going that way, a little bit kind of going that way. The hood, as far as like positioning, you know, the hood is adjustable. So either you're going to get it just right, or when you close it, this thing's going to pull the hood into place. You know, one or the other is going to happen whenever I end up taking the hood off again. But for the most part, I have lots of markings to make sure that things go right back in the, you know, as close to the same place as possible. But that's cool. It has a little adjustment here. You know, the holes are oversized so that even once this is all done and dried in place, I should be able to move that plate a little if I have to. Alright, I'm getting ready to bond this latch plunger into the hood, and I've got it put back together. So I've labeled it for the side that points to the driver and the side that points to the passenger side. Even though it's all the same, when you put all this stuff together, you know, the way that you cut the metal plate, the way you cut the opening, everything it's a little different. So I just found that it sits a little easier when this side is pointing to the driver. So that's basically what I'm getting ready to do, and I think it's going to work out pretty good. So what I'm planning to do is, you can see the hood back there. I'm going to set this thing in there after I put some of the flux mixture in that hole. I'm going to kind of smear it around in there. This is going to squeeze into it, and then I'm going to lay the hood down and make sure the angle is right and pop it into the latch. So that way, as that resin cures, we're going to be set right at the right angle that we need. And the other thing I did was I put some little green tape circles on the back. That way resin doesn't squeeze into these bolt areas and make it hard to remove those bolts.
So there we go. Alright, I'd say I'm pretty happy with how this turned out. So I'm going to flip the latch open. Now, you can see that, you know, there's a bit of a angle on that, which is what I needed. And, you know, it came out pretty good, even though I was kind of working from underneath. There's a hole there that I'm going to have to fill, but that's no big deal. It's just that I'd put the resin flocks on and just shut the hood. But it's funny, I think I put my finger underneath the hood and like smoothed that out after it was setting, so it came out pretty good. And then over here I'm just gonna have to, you know, kind of get the latch off and clean the tape and whatnot, sand down the excess. But otherwise, I can't complain. Now I'm still holding the latch under here when I shut it, but you can see it pretty much goes right to that little hole. And as long as I hold the latch, because I got to build the other brace, that's the last part, is build the brace that goes down to the body. As long as I kind of hold it, I can click it shut, just like that. So, man, that's great. I'm pretty happy with that.
Overall, I would say this was probably one of the smoothest going tasks that had to be accomplished on this car. You know, it was just one of those things where everything seemed to flow. I was able to figure things out, things worked. You know, it's great to have a little bit of a break like that sometimes, because there are definitely certain parts of this car where it's going to seem like it's just not working until it finally does. So to summarize it a little bit, remember, you're going to have to cut about a 1/2 inch off the bolt. And that's the big bolt, you know. Also, the bolts that are mounting the latch plunger to the hood, depending on which bolts that you use, you're going to have to get rid of any excess that might go too far into the hood. And then the coil spring, that little coil spring, you basically want to take about 2 coils off of it, because the way that you have to twist the plunger really far into the bracket to get this to work, and to get the hood to pull down low enough, the spring is going to be under a lot of pressure. So it's better if you take a couple coils off that spring. That way you're not putting so much pulling force on the cable to release it. So I think I pretty much covered the important stuff. No, actually, the really important thing, I didn't show it in this section, but I mentioned it. It's the brace that goes on the other side of the hood latch. Okay, so you've got the 3 bolts that hold your bracket, and then the 2 bolts that hold the bracket to the latch, to the BMW latch. But the part that curves up, you need to make sure that you add a brace. Now what I did, I don't have a picture of it or anything, and it's all taken apart now, but it was 1 piece of flat bar. I drilled a hole in the top, I got the angle to match the latch, and I ran it down to the body, which basically ends up right at the wheel tub. And all you basically got to do is, you know, put a 90 degree on the bottom of that bracket that you're building and run a bolt through the wheel tub. So you're basically creating a big L leg, and that's going to help you stabilize the latch on the other side, and it's going to make it super sturdy. You know, this is, I'm very happy with the way that this hood latch came out. So I think it's going to work. Shouldn't have any problems with it. Now the mirrors that they've been recommending for the Vaydor build are from the 2010 to 2015 Chevy Camaro. And I've seen people use the G35 mirrors. You know, I'm gonna be totally honest, I think I like the way the G35 mirrors kind of sit. I don't know, it's an opinion, but mine were all broken and messed up, so I just said, you know, let me grab some of these Camaro mirrors. And I think I paid $100 for the powered ones, you know, on eBay. And, you know, mounting them took me a few hours. It was really the fact that I was being slow and careful about how I cut out the hole. I didn't want to overcut the door, because then I'd have to go back and patch up fiberglass, and you know, it was just me kind of taking it slow to try and see if I could get them to fit at the angle that I wanted and how they were going to go. You're also going to have to drill holes through the inner part of the door shell where there's kind of like this fiberglass that comes over, and that's where the nuts are going to end up holding on. But ultimately, when it's all said and done, I'm going to have to go in and add, you know, some flux. I'm going to have to grind the inside of that a little bit because those bolts sit at kind of a strange angle. And if you want it to really hold good, you're going to have to build the fiberglass in there to, you know, to hold those nuts correctly. So that's probably the most complicated part about mounting the mirrors, but otherwise I was able to get them rough mounted on fairly easily.
Alright, so I've just kind of shoved the wire in there for now. Now, you can see when I put this through, it sits pretty good, but the bolts are going to come through inside here. Let's see. Alright. So when you tighten them, they go through at kind of a strange angle, and that's what I was saying. You're going to have to get creative in how you grind into this and maybe put some putty back there, like a, you know, the resin putty backing. So you're gonna have to build like a backing and try to make it at the correct angle. So I haven't really done it yet. I mean, I don't think it's gonna be that difficult. I'm just kind of saving it for like when I start finishing the door. But also, I don't like that the way the window's gonna sit. It's gonna be pretty close to that bolt. So I'm probably gonna put the nut on and get it to go in there as far as I can. And then I'm going to shave the excess of the bolts off just so they're not sticking in here that far. Now the other part was, they do seem to sit a little high. I mean, it all depends on how the car is sitting. Right now it's off the ground. It's not that bad. But from what I understand, sometimes you're supposed to trim around here. And that's kind of, you know, I might have mentioned that in one of my talking videos. But I don't know for sure yet that I'm going to do that. And here's why. Now, there's a little bit of a gap in here, so you could see if... It's hard to see, actually, with a camera, but it runs along there. So you could see that if you could trim this properly and get that all to sit flat, it might work good. But the thing about it is when you take this out and look at it, I don't think there's a good area to cut here. I just feel like anything you cut, it's gonna mess with the integrity of how this mirror is built and how it's put together. And even though you could get creative with some, I don't know, panel bond, and that, still that's a question of if panel bond is really compatible with this type of plastic or not. But you could probably find some way to cut it and then glue it to make sure it's strong, you know, if you had to. But I just don't know if it's sitting at such a bad angle that it's worth it for me to do that. I might just leave it. And then if I really don't like the way the mirrors sit, maybe I'll just find some different ones to put on later. But right now, that's kind of where I'm at. Both the mirrors are that way. And I've actually got the engine out. I'm getting ready to put the low mileage motor in. I've got it all attached to the transmission over there. So anyway, that's where we're at.
Now for these pieces, they weren't too bad. It's a little confusing because they come with so much excess material. You're left constantly questioning, like, okay, do I need to use this somehow? Like, did they do this for a reason? But I really think there's just a lot you have to cut off. And I didn't find a reason or even an easy way to be able to use that excess that goes in, like towards the door, and you know, it'd be like behind the hinge or whatever. It just ended up working out that I'm using these pieces as what's pretty much at the face. You know, once it hits the door and curves in, you just kind of cut it ½ inch after that or whatever. As far as mounting them, you're gonna see how I did it. Same thing as some of the other trim pieces. If you didn't get to see those in another video, you can see here the way that most of them work is it's basically I position the piece where I want it, run 2 self-tapping screws in, and then I use the third one up underneath to get that positioning right. And then after that, I'm able to install the permanent machine screws that are gonna, you know, ultimately be resin puttied into that panel permanently. and then, you know, when you put the piece on, you're gonna have those studs sticking through the body, and then you use some wing nuts and lock washers. Simple as that. And that's pretty much how these go. So here's a short clip to kind of show you how I did it.
Alright, so before we move on, here's the brief rundown on these pieces. So basically, the top corner, the bottom little leg there, once you get it trimmed, they're just going to be held in, you know, do the studs the same way. And you can see I grind quite a bit into the panel to use like a countersinking Phillips screw. And of course, you put this on first with some self-tappers, you know, make sure it's in the place that you want it, and run the self-tapping screw just all the way through both layers. Now, when you tighten this with the wing nuts that I'm putting on here, they're gonna pull that nicely. That's why you want these to be strong too. So once you get those two screws where you want them, it's pretty easy to just run the third one, and it's just gonna go right up through there. Now this is gonna be something like maybe one of those little square inserts, or, you know, a little plastic insert, who knows, whatever you can come up with. But that's gonna be kind of like the third screw that you put in, because these two studs are gonna go in, you know, they're gonna be permanently mounted. So now if you do the resin, once you get the holes done, and then you go back and you put the actual stud screw in, and you know, putty it on with the resin flocks. Let it dry, let it completely cure, you know, best to leave it on overnight or whatever. And then whenever you take this off, if it doesn't come off easily, just work it out until the holes kind of, you know, the threads will etch the holes out a little bit to where this comes out and goes in real easy. But once you get those done that way, you know that they're pretty strong. And then you're gonna be able to go back and put a little bit more on that side. So I'm usually putting the putty, I'm just gonna kind of build it up to where it's holding the stud really nice in here, and just don't let it really build up above that level, because if you do, then it's not gonna sit flat on the car the way that you want it. And same over here. So I've got it prepped, sand it with some 60 or 40 grit, 36, whatever, and put some more Phlox putty on the inside. That way they hold really good.
Alright, so getting to this point has been pretty exciting. You know, there's really only the wiper cowl trim piece that's left, and as far as the fiberglass goes anyway, you know, the other day I was kind of thinking, man, I've pretty much achieved like this Vaydor body install. I mean, sure, there's still all the finishing and the detail work to do, which is probably the biggest part of the job, but to get this kit in so many pieces and go through all the headaches and the things that I've gone through to this point, I feel like it's been accomplished, and that's really cool. So as this video kind of comes to an end, what I want to do is I want to go through some of the little things that I've done that are kind of part of the build. You know, getting this car to work, it's not so much the fiberglass and the kit itself, but it's some of those loose ends that I'm having to tie up at the end. One of them being the hood support underneath. Now, this kind of goes hand in hand. I thought I was going to install the gas struts to help lift the hood, but I'm pretty much saying no to those. I know some people install them on their cars. I don't like how with my particular hood, I don't know if it's just the way I've got the hinges on or what, but I don't like that the gas struts are actually causing my hood to bow quite a bit, and it's going to cause it to set high, which means there would be a lot of excessive body work to do to correct that. I think I've pretty much decided that I'm going to leave the hood struts off, but I think I'm going to include the section in this video where I was installing them, trying to figure it out, because I installed these two brackets underneath that are going to hold the front clip to the front bumper really nice. And that's gonna help you if you decide not to do hood struts as well. You're still gonna probably want to do some kind of support pieces like this. And all I basically did was made it to where they're gonna use nuts to hold to the bottom of the hood hinge bolts. So we're gonna throw a few more sections in kind of like that to end out this video. But overall, I don't know if I'm gonna do a part 9 for like the Vaydor build, or if I'm just gonna say Vaydor paint job. You know, maybe we'll end the series here as far as the Vaydor body build is concerned. I don't know, but I'll figure that out. Either way, I feel like we've reached a really cool milestone. It looks awesome. I mean, I take pictures every time I've got it all put together. At this point right now, the car is actually taken back apart. I have the motor and transmission out of it because I'm putting in a lower mileage motor that I found, and also wanted to prep and paint the engine bay a little bit just to clean it up. So I feel like in the next video we're probably going to be talking a little bit more about the paint job and hopefully getting ready to paint the main body shell of the car and go from there.
So I saw that one of the Vaydor owners put these nice little, you know, strut springs on the hood. So what you basically got to do is you get the brackets that come with it, and you're going to cut this piece off because you want to end up welding. I didn't want to weld to these hinges, but I've come to realize, you know, whatever I have to. But what's cool is if you mark this with a little bit of a curve before you cut it, you'll have metal on here that'll meet up real nice with the hinge. So if you see what I'm doing here, I'm going to hold this up, and it literally is going to fit right in here. Focus, yeah, like that. So you just want to make sure it's probably in line with the way the hood's going to go down. Maybe turn it that way a bit. You could probably line up this little top, and I've got the curve on top. So you could probably line up this little end with the jump in the thickness, or the bend there. Something like that. If it'll focus now. Alright, so anyway, yeah, something like that. It's hard to video this, but try that.
Now, even though I decided not to use these struts, there's a lot of good craftsman kind of stuff going on in this. I mean, I feel like this might help you in some way or another. At least if you decide that you really want to use these hood struts, maybe this will help you get a head start, and then you can figure out the rest from there.
Okay, what I've figured out so far is the tack welding went good, and you can see the way that I cut that bracket. I just made a nice little curve so that when I weld it, it's going to be a good, you know, tight weld. I have to do a lot of filling. I'm going to have to cut this off this little screw. That screw is a guide. I've got two that are going to basically be my guides, so that when it comes time to take this thing apart, I don't want to be moving around the adjustment. I'm going to have screws that fit tight so I know exactly where the hinge goes. And then of course there's, you know, the bottom part where I etched into the little mounds. So these are always going to sit in the same place. So when I take the hinges off, I want them to go back on easy to the right place. Now, I'm going to take them off to do the solid welding and get that, you know, all done. And just not yet. I'm kind of building things out. This should be good enough to get these little gas shocks installed. So once you've got that bolted there, okay, the hole, I'm going to still probably have to adjust it and cut it out a little bit more because I think it needs to go over here to the left a bit. But what I've done for the bottom is I realized that that thing hangs almost a little bit too low. So I've made these two brackets that are going to be extensions from the front bumper. And that's kind of one of the perks of putting that front bumper back in, is I'm going to, for the time being, I'm going to use these kind of big self-tapping screws, and I'm going to get it to where this bracket is attached to the bumper. And these are going to allow the extension for the gas shocks, you know, for the link. Here, we'll go up under there real quick. Let's see if we can, oh yeah, we can see it. Okay, so basically if this goes on here, see if we can get this to focus too. I just got a new phone that I'm videoing with, so I'm still learning how to. All right, so there we go. Now that part is gonna be bolted there, and then we're gonna have this little extension bolted to the bumper here. So I think this is gonna work. I used some flat bar. It's like not 1/4 inch thick, but it's thicker than 1/8. It's like that stuff you use for chain link fences, you know. So yeah, anyway, I think this is gonna work. But the key here, don't forget, you need to prop the hood to the height where you think you're gonna want it to go when these gas struts are all the way extended. And see, I still have a little bit of a gap there. And you also wanna allow some play, because these gas struts have a little bit of play in them. So, you know, if you wiggle the hood a bit, say someone pushes the hood up a little extra, you wanna make sure there's some extra where it's not gonna hit the paint and bottom out if it jiggles a little bit. So that's how this is going. I really need a 90-degree drill setup because my drill is just a little too big to get in here behind the front clip. And I don't know, I'll figure it out, but I need to drill some holes up here. I've got them marked and punched with a little center punch, but yeah, so hoping that this works. We shall see. All right, so what's going on now is, and I kind of figured this was gonna be the case, but when you put the struts on, you know, you can't get an action without a reaction. So the struts are trying to push the hood up. That's also gonna pull the hinges and the body. So what was happening is, you know, whatever you wanna call it, the gas shocks, the spring shocks, whatever, they're putting all that force, so it's a little bit, it's just making too much movement. So what I gotta do, and I had already kind of brainstormed on this a little bit before it happened, I just wanted to see the severity of it. I wanted to see how much does the body actually flex, and is it gonna be completely necessary? I feel like it is gonna be necessary to add these supports in. And what I'm basically doing is I'm gonna cut some brackets that bolt to the front bumper, and then they're gonna support the underneath of the body, and it's gonna use the same 2 bolts as the hood hinge. So the bolts are gonna go through and thread into the body, but they're gonna be a little bit longer so that a nut can go under here, and that's gonna sandwich it all together. So when I open and close the hood, the body shell itself should sit right at the same height, but the hood is gonna have the support of those struts. So that's what I'm doing now, and like I said, I kind of figured it was gonna be the case, but wasn't 100% sure, so I'm gonna go ahead and add these in. Okay, so here we are. We're going in through the front grille, and what I was basically explaining was I've already pre-cut some pieces, so this angle iron, I'm gonna use some, you know, temporarily use some self-tapping screws to hold this on. Now, eventually I might run bolts all the way through the bumper, I don't know. Now this is the piece that's gonna go up under here, and I've already got it where it fits. So I'm gonna have to run and grab some longer bolts. This side might work, the other side the bolts are a bit short, but this one has enough where I think I can put a nut on here. That's gonna hold it in place, and it's gonna allow me to put a brace, probably a piece of round tubing between the 2 brackets, and I'm gonna weld it in place so that this is gonna support the fiberglass body from the bumper, and that's basically what I'm trying to achieve. I just want the body to stay nice and straight, you know, stable when the gas struts are pushing the hood up or holding it up or whatever. I want this to stay in place nice and stiff, because right now it doesn't, it moves a little bit. So hopefully this works. We're gonna try it out.
And this is the part where I was basically saying earlier that even if you don't use the hood struts, you can probably benefit from doing this anyway. Having the body reinforced in this area is not really going to be a bad thing. You know, it's right there where the hood hinges bolt on, and you know, that seems like a point that should be pretty strong anyway. So it doesn't hurt to build these little brackets to go down to your bumper, even if you're not gonna need it for the reinforcement of those hood struts. Now it only makes sense that because the roof is so much lower in this car from the original roof, you're gonna have to drop the steering wheel down a bit. You know, visibility is very limited. It's like you're looking through a slot pretty much on this car. And the steering wheel is right in the middle of that. So I was able to drop it down probably a good 2-3, I don't know how many inches it is at the steering wheel, but at the place where it bolts together, it's about 1.5 inches that I did so far. And I feel like that is probably going to be fine for me. And you know, as one of the other guys on the Vaydor group mentioned, you got to make sure you can still get in and out of the car. You know, you could go down pretty low, but depending on which seats that you use, if you use the ones that came with the interior kit or not, you know, it just all depends. So I'm going to start with where I'm at. I feel like visibility is tolerable where it's at, especially if I get a steering wheel with like the flat top and the flat bottom, or maybe the cutaway, I don't know, the yoke style, who knows. But for now, this is at least low enough to get me going, and then I'll figure out if it needs to come down further than that. Now, it is a bit tricky just because of the way that this column has like these, you know, these little springs in it. You really have to, you'll see the way that I'm using vice grips to pivot the area that the bolt goes through so that the threads will actually line up. So there's a little bit to this, but you know, not too bad.
All right, we're sitting in the driver's area now. There's the steering wheel. And in the midst of doing everything I gotta do in here, I decided to go ahead and try to do the steering wheel lowering. Now, I think a lot of people are saying it should go more. Someone told me to go 3 inches with the spacer, and I mean, that's a lot. You gotta undo a few other things under here to get it to, you know, actually drop down that far. But I decided to start with this little bit here and then see if it helps me. Now when I sit, I can see about as clearly as I feel like I'll be able to see through this thing. The steering wheel is not really in my way of sight right now, and that's only about 1.5 inches down that it came. At the, I guess maybe 2 inches here, but it's only a little more than 1 inch there that it came at the brackets. Now, what you're gonna wanna do, I believe this is a 4-inch bolt. Now the ones I've been getting at Lowe's, they've got these goofy bolts that don't have the threads going all the way down. I had to thread the bolts a little bit further. Now that one's probably a 4-inch. I believe these are, let's see, these should be 3.5s, I think. Yeah, those I believe were 3.5-inch bolts. I'm trying to get an accurate. No, they might even be 3s here. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna measure this one. Okay, so this one is a 4-inch bolt, and it looks like it's 1 inch longer than the other one. So I got 3-inch bolts. So if you wanna just do it this much, if you wanna do the same way I did, you get 2 3-inch bolts. You might have to thread, they're 8-1.25s, so they're metric, I guess. And what I had to do was, with these silly ones that only have the threads going a little ways down, I don't know why my camera won't automatically focus, it's kind of annoying. But I had to run the threads a little further with my die, so if you have your threading set, you can do that. So I would put the bolt in the vise, I threaded it another 1/4 to, you know, whatever, 3/8 down, so that it had a little bit more threads. And then the spacer, you're gonna have to put a washer under the spacer, because the spacer will actually slide into the hole if you don't put a washer there. The hole is big enough, okay? So also, you're gonna wanna cut the bottom of the spacer at an angle. I started with 1.5 inch spacer, and you can see I took about a little more than 1/4 inch off and cut it at an angle one side. So the bottom is where you're gonna want that angle to go. And this sits pretty nice. Now the only other tricky thing about this is you can see all this mechanism and stuff here. It's gonna act like when you first drop the steering wheel, you're gonna feel like these bolts are on a serious bind. But what you gotta do is put the vice grips on that little lip right there that folds over, and you're gonna be able to kind of, you know, spring this up and down, and you're gonna be able to tilt this whole thing. And that's what's going to allow you to get these bolts in without feeling like you're binding them up on the threads. So once you get all this stuff ready, now I also installed a lock washer and a regular washer on the head of the bolt, so that way they kind of lock in. Now once you get all that ready to go, you've cut your spacers down, you've threaded the bolts a little further. So again, it's a 3-inch bolt. You just put that vice grip on this lip and rock it upward so that you can feel, at the same time you're going to have the extension, the socket extension and the socket in your other hand, and you're trying to turn it in like a screwdriver. So turn that in while you're rocking this thing and you can feel that you're not binding up the bolt. So that's what I was able to do. And really, I don't know for sure if this is going to be low enough, because like I said, some people have told me to bring it down like twice that much. So, but then again, I don't really know. Everybody's build's different. They say that if the steering wheel gets too low, you can't get in the car because you got these big seats too. So that's pretty much what I did for my steering wheel drop down. And it seems to work pretty good. Now the gauge cluster sits right on top of it and still isn't really in the way of the sight. You can see through the steering wheel, and then you can see right over it pretty much. This is what the view looks like. And I mean, yeah, the visibility is limited, but this is okay. I mean, this I think is workable. So that's what I've done for dropping the steering wheel, and we'll see if that's okay. There was one other thing before I cut this off. When you drop it down, the ignition switch is gonna hit this steel bracket. It's mainly the wiring harness. So I had to bring it back, or I took the ignition switch off, and then I was able to notch out this bracket just enough to where now the wiring harness can just sit in there and it doesn't put it up against it really tight or anything. So there we go. Hopefully another task is done, and I don't know. You always have to revisit stuff, so we'll just roll with it.
I gotta say, like, this thing just, it's such a cool car. I mean, and I had it so put together, with the new wheels on it and everything. I mean, I'm just blown away by how amazing this thing looks. And I know with paint, it's gonna look even cooler. So, I take a lot of pictures of it, and really, I need to keep building. It's just, I'm ready for it to be done. Alright, so I've got you guys pretty much caught up to where I'm at on this build. At this point, I've actually got the engine and transmission out, and the new engine is bolted up to the transmission so that we're ready to go back in. It's just we've had some rainy days, so I'm wanting to prep the engine bay a little bit and maybe throw some nice satin black in there. I have that really nice Axalta DuPont industrial stuff that I mix with a hardener, and it's a super durable automotive industrial paint, and I want to put some of that stuff in there, that way when the engine goes in, everything looks nice and clean, and at least even if it gets banged up a little bit, I could probably touch it up. It's not going to be white like the car was before. So that's the main reason I'm waiting right now. So really, it's a matter of getting this engine and trans put back in, and then we're going to start the paint process, and that's probably where the next video is going to pick up. Once again, hopefully it's not too long, but I've got a few other restorations of pianos and stuff. I'm probably going to throw up another video in between, and maybe, catch up on a few of those. So thank you guys again for all the continued support. Hopefully, I've seen a few new Vaydor builds pop up on YouTube lately, so that's kind of cool. Hopefully, if you guys have found these videos, you're able to use them to your advantage, and maybe save yourself some of the headaches that I've been dealing with. Alright, so until next time, you guys take it easy and safe building out there. Woo!